I didn't know panic had a smell until I ripped open my front door in pajama pants and saw an empty porch where my son's life-saving medication was supposed to be. Then I looked up and caught Karen from the HOA, walking away with a plastic thermal envelope in her hand, like she'd just cleaned up litter instead of stealing the one thing standing between my 9-year-old and another hospital bed. Some people abuse power for money, some do it for attention, and some do it because they love watching other people scramble. I tore down the steps barefoot, heart hammering, and she turned just in time to flash that smug little smile she always wore right before handing somebody a warning letter. "Unapproved porch clutter," she said. I remember staring at her because my brain could not process that a grown woman had just picked up clearly marked prescription medication and called it clutter. My son Caleb had gotten home from the hospital the day before after a flare from his autoimmune disorder. The medication coming that morning had to stay cold, had to be signed for, and had to be used fast if his symptoms turned. I'd spent 3 days fighting with pharmacists, doctors, and delivery people to get it there on time. For a moment, I thought the hard part was over. Then Karen happened. When I pulled up the ring footage, it looked so ridiculous it almost felt fake. The courier set the package neatly on my doormat and left. 5 seconds later, here came Karen in a bathrobe, Crocs, and a coffee mug that said, "Boss, Babe." She bent down, read the label, looked around, picked up the package, and walked off with the calm confidence of a woman who'd spent years mistaking trespassing for leadership. By the time I got to her house, I found her by the side yard trash bin. I threw open the lid and felt my stomach just drop. The insulated box was crumpled under coffee grounds and a banana peel. The syringe pack punctured, the medical label smeared. Ruined. Karen came around the corner, crossed her arms, and said in that soft little HOA voice, "I'm going to have to report you for trespassing." I held up the destroyed pack. This was for my son. She didn't blink. "Then maybe you should pick up your deliveries faster. Porch clutter is a violation." That was the moment it stopped being neighbor drama in my head. This wasn't petty. This was dangerous. She had touched, removed, and destroyed clearly labeled prescription medication for a child, then wrapped herself in HOA language like that made her untouchable. I got Caleb stabilized with backup meds from the hospital, but the whole time he was curled against me on the couch. Watching cartoons, breathing a little too carefully, I kept thinking about Karen's face. Not confused, not sorry, pleased, like she'd won something. That night, she posted in the neighborhood Facebook group about entitled residents using family emergencies to dodge HOA policy. She hinted I was unstable, dramatic, one of those single moms who expected special treatment. A few neighbors liked the post because ignorance spreads fast when it's dressed up as authority. What Karen never bothered to learn about me was simple: I'm a prosecutor. I've spent 11 years pulling lies apart in courtrooms. I know what negligence looks like. I know what intent looks like, and I know what malice looks like when it wears pearls and quotes bylaws. By the next morning, I had filed a police report, preserved the ring footage, documented the damage, and requested an emergency board meeting. If Karen wanted procedure, I was about to drown her in it. She showed up to that meeting in a pink pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, carrying herself like she was about to host a charity brunch instead of answer for endangering a child. She smiled when she saw me and slid a folder across the table. "Glad you could make it," she said. "We need to discuss your hostility." I didn't sit. "You're being investigated for tampering with prescription medication," I said. "You should be finding a lawyer." That smile twitched. She tried every excuse you'd expect. She didn't know what was in the package. It had been left outside too long. She thought it violated code. So I dropped the HOA bylaws in front of her and pointed to the part she'd invented in her own head. No rule gave her authority to remove packages. No clause gave her the right to destroy prescription property. HOA rules do not outrank state law, federal law, or common decency. Then came the twist Karen never saw coming. Near the end of the meeting, Mr. Delancey walked in. Retired engineer, quiet man, the kind people underestimate because he doesn't waste words. He didn't make a speech. He just set a USB drive in front of me, gave Karen one long look, and sat in the back. That night I opened the files. They were from the HOA's internal security cameras. There was Karen clear as day. Seeing the package, reading the medical label, glancing around, carrying it to her side yard, taking out her phone, photographing it, then dropping it into the trash. Not confusion, not a mistake. Intent. I forwarded the footage to Detective Reynolds that same night. By the next morning, Karen was under formal investigation for child endangerment and destruction of medical property. And because arrogant people rarely know when to stop digging, she escalated. She printed a letter and put it on every door in the neighborhood. She accused me of falsifying evidence, manipulating sympathy, exaggerating Caleb's condition. That was the moment the whole thing stopped being just my fight. Once neighbors saw how far she was willing to go, stories started crawling out of the walls. A service animal she'd reported, a veteran she'd fined over a flag, an elderly couple whose wheelchair ramp had been removed after she called it an aesthetic violation. So I did what I do best. I built a case. Statements, dates, screenshots, board records, prior complaints. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. Karen hadn't just been weaponizing rules, she'd been profiting from them. Detective Reynolds called me 2 days later and told me HOA reimbursements were being routed to a landscaping company under her cousin's name. That was when I realized Karen hadn't built herself a little kingdom. She'd built a business model. The local news picked up the story after the civil suit was filed. Karen still tried to act untouchable. She hosted some absurd HOA trust seminar at the clubhouse, complete with cookies, a slideshow, and a speech about civility. She actually quoted Gandhi, which was rich coming from a woman who threw away a sick child's medication. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood up. How exactly, I asked, does destroying my son's medication improve community trust? She snapped that she hadn't known it was medication. I asked if she wanted me to play the footage. Then somebody asked about the wheelchair ramp. Another neighbor asked about the veteran. Another asked about the service dog. The whole room shifted right there. Fear cracked. People started talking. Then Mr. Delancey said, calm as a judge, she does not speak for us. By the time we got to court, Karen's defense had shrunk down to confusion and misunderstanding. I laid out everything. The ring video, the HOA footage, the damaged medication, the Facebook posts, the letters, the witness statements, the financial records. But the moment that really buried her came from somewhere she never expected. Her own daughter took the stand. She was in her 20s, composed in that careful way people get when they've spent years surviving one difficult parent. Under oath, she admitted Karen loved visible power, loved making examples out of people, loved being feared. Then she said, my mother used to say power means nothing if people aren't afraid of it. You could feel that land in the room. When Karen testified, she tried on humility like a borrowed coat. Soft voice tissues, selective memory. She said she never saw the medical label, so I showed the photo she took of the package. She said she never meant harm. So I read her letter accusing me of exaggerating my son's illness. The jury came back fast. Liable on all civil counts, negligence, destruction of medical property, emotional distress, defamation, punitive damages, permanent removal from the HOA. And before she could leave the courthouse and start rewriting herself into a victim, she was served with criminal indictment papers tied to the fraud investigation. That look on her face. I'm not proud of how satisfying that was, but I'm not going to lie to you either. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Not into chaos like Karen always warned, into relief. Porch swings came back out. Garden gnomes reappeared. People laughed louder. Kids played longer. It turned out the community didn't need a tyrant with a clipboard. It needed people to stop being scared. Caleb felt it too. He didn't understand lawsuits or indictments, but he understood that the woman who made things scary wasn't in charge anymore. A few weeks later, I was driving Caleb to soccer when we passed a county roadside cleanup crew on Route 16. Orange vests, trash grabbers, highway dust, heat shimmering off the road. And there she was, Karen. Hair pulled back, tight shoulders slumped, picking candy wrappers out of a ditch with no pearls, no clipboard. She looked up. We locked eyes. I gave her the same polite little wave she used to give people right before ruining their week. Then I drove on. And honestly, that felt like the real ending, not the verdict, not the cameras, not the indictment, that wave. Because by then she wasn't some all-powerful HOA queen anymore. She was just a woman in a county vest cleaning up trash on the side of the road. What I learned from all this is something bitter but true. Dangerous people don't always arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes they look organized, helpful, involved. They hide cruelty inside procedure and call it order. They count on decent people being too tired or too overwhelmed to fight back. And sometimes justice isn't about some giant dramatic crime. Sometimes it's about refusing to let one petty person decide that your child's life is less important than their ego. I didn't fight Karen because I wanted revenge. I fought because peace doesn't come back on its own. Sometimes you have to drag it home. So let me ask you this. When does enforcing the rules stop being leadership and start becoming abuse? And if somebody hid behind authority while putting your family in danger, How far would you go to stop them? Drop your take in the comments. Who was right? Who crossed the line? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a Karen, or anyone drunk on a little bit of power, tell your story too.